Baghdad, the luminous heart of the Islamic Golden Age, was founded in 762 AD by the visionary Caliph al-Mansur of the Abbasid dynasty, that was the third caliphate to succeed the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Rising from the ruins of the Umayyad Empire, Baghdad was strategically positioned near Persia, far from past threats, and quickly became one of the wealthiest and most powerful cities in the world. Its riches, drawn from vast trade routes and taxes, fueled an empire that dazzled the globe. Baghdad's influence grew as the biggest center of global knowledge and culture, attracting poets, philosophers, scientists, and scholars. At the core of this intellectual renaissance was the House of Wisdom, a monumental library where ancient wisdom from Greece, Persia, and India was revived and expanded. With observatories reaching the heavens and the advent of paper sparking a literary revolution, Baghdad stood as the intellectual capital of the planet, magnifying human achievement to its highest potential. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and Baghdad's golden era was no exception. By the 10th century, the mighty Abbasid Caliphate, that would swiftly expand their realm from Arabia to the Levant, Syria, North Africa, and deep into Iraq, began to crumble, weakened by internal strife and external threats. The once powerful caliphs were reduced to mere puppets as the Buyids occupied Baghdad in 945, followed by the Seljuks in 1055. But a darker menace loomed: the Mongol Empire. Unlike the settled Abbasids, the Mongols were nomadic warriors, constantly on the move. Their way of life often clashed with more established societies like the Abbasid Caliphate. Known for their terrifying tactics, the Mongols were infamous for their brutal strategies. If you heard the ominous clanging of pots and pans, or the aggressive rattling of bells, it was a sign of imminent danger. The Mongols would offer a chance to surrender, but if refused, their attacks were marked by mass destruction and bloodshed. This era of turmoil began with Temujin, who united the Mongol tribes and took the name Genghis Khan. His grandson, Hulagu Khan, continued this expansion, pushing through Syria and consolidating power in the Ilkhanate of Persia. By 1236, the Mongols had captured Isfahan and began testing Baghdad's defenses. Their raids in 1237 and 1238 brought terror to the very walls of the city. Baghdad, the city of 1,000,000 souls, stood defiant, repelling Mongol forces in 1245 in a desperate desire to preserve its glory. However, the true test was yet to come. Hulagu Khan, having subdued various foes, including the Shiite assassins in 1256, turned his full attention to Baghdad. By this time, the Abbasids had seen better days. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had once been a dominant force, was now showing signs of weakening. By the time Hulagu arrived on the scene, the caliphs were no longer the powerful rulers they once were, politically and militarily. Despite the fact that the Abbasids were already paying tribute to the Mongols, the current caliph, al-Mustasim, remained largely indifferent to the looming threat. He had heard whispers of Hulagu's ambitions, but the caliph, swayed by his Grand Vizier's advice, failed to grasp the severity of the danger. The Grand Vizier, who was rumored to harbor personal grievances against al-Mustasim and had been offended by the caliph's past actions, may have even seen the Mongols as an opportunity to advance his own agenda. Whether or not he actively invited the Mongols remains debated, but the outcome was clear. Al-Mustasim grossly underestimated Hulagu's determination. In September 1257, Hulagu Khan initiated a correspondence with the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim, which the historian René Grousset described as one of the most magnificent dialogues in history. Hulagu's first message demanded that the caliph peacefully submit to Mongol rule and send his 3 top ministers, the vizier, the military commander, and the dawadar, keeper of the inkpot, as a sign of compliance. However, all 3 officials likely refused, and the caliph instead sent 3 less important figures. In his reply, al-Mustasim insulted Hulagu, calling him young and ignorant, and boasted that he could summon armies from across the Islamic world. But this was largely empty bravado. The Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt was hostile to the caliph, and the Ayyubids in Syria were preoccupied with their own survival. Despite further exchanges, little was achieved, with the caliph offering only a small tribute. The vizier al-Alqami advised sending a large sum, but the Dawadar opposed this, suspecting that al-Alqami was trying to curry favor with Hulagu. Frustrated, Hulagu consulted his advisors on attacking Baghdad. One, the astronomer Husam al-Din, predicted disaster, saying that all who had attacked Baghdad had later lost their kingdoms. But the polymath Nasir al-Din al-Tusi reassured Hulagu, stating that no such disasters would occur, and that Hulagu would succeed the caliph as ruler. And then in December 1257, with unbeaten confidence leaning on the prophecy, Hulagu Khan and his Mongol army began their approach toward their prey, Baghdad. They first sacked Kermanshah on December 6th, marking the start of their campaign. After a war council in mid-December, Hulagu's commanders dispersed to execute their assigned tasks. Baiju, one of Hulagu's generals, led the vanguard and crossed the Tigris River at Mosul and reached the Nahr Isa Canal, just 25 miles from Baghdad by mid-January 1258. On January 16th, the Abbasid army, led by the Dawadar, confronted the Mongols with 20,000 infantry, managing to push them back. However, that night, the Mongols retaliated with a cunning move. They broke the dikes of the Dujel Canal, flooding the Abbasid camp. It caused chaos, drowning many soldiers, and by the next morning, Baiju's forces had easily routed the remaining Abbasid troops. Only a few, including the Dawadar, managed to escape back to Baghdad. Meanwhile, Kitbuka, another of Hulagu's generals, crossed the Tigris from the south and moved toward the Karkh suburbs, while Hulagu himself reached the eastern suburbs of Baghdad on January 22nd, where he was welcomed by local Shiites. The Mongols swiftly surrounded Baghdad, erecting a palisade and digging a moat incredibly within a day. They built mounds for their siege weapons and prepared burning naphtha as ammunition. To prevent escape via the Tigris, Hulagu ordered pontoon bridges on both sides of the river. Despite Baghdad's weakened defenses, flood-damaged walls, and an untrained garrison of only 50,000, Hulagu's meticulously planned siege left no room for escape, ensuring the city's eventual fall to the relentless Mongol forces. The assault on Baghdad's walls began with a fury on January 29th or 30th. The Mongol forces sent arrowed messages into the city, offering false promises of safety to Christians, select Muslims, and those who hadn't fought. On February 1st, the Mongols breached the southeast Ajami Tower near Hulagu's camp. The defenders, fueled by desperation, fought back with a wild ferocity, managing to repel the invaders. But this brief moment of triumph was just the prelude to a far darker chapter. For 2 relentless days, the Mongols hammered the walls, opening more breaches until, on February 4th, they seized the eastern battlements. The city trembled as the enemy poured in, their banners casting long, menacing shadows over the streets. Amidst the chaos, the Dawadar, Baghdad's last hope, attempted a desperate escape down the Tigris. But Hulagu had anticipated this move, and his forces, like vultures circling a dying beast, forced the Dawadar back to Baghdad, sinking 3 of his ships in a flood of arrows and flame. Panic swept through Baghdad like wildfire, and the once proud city was engulfed in terror. Caliph al-Mustasim, his heart heavy with despair, sent envoys to plead with Hulagu. Among them, the patriarch of the Church of the East begged for mercy. But Hulagu, a figure of icy resolve, was unmoved. He demanded absolute surrender, and when one of his commanders was wounded during negotiations, his fury knew no bounds. The Dawadar and the garrison commander were delivered to him, and their lives were snuffed out without hesitation. On February 7th, the gates of Baghdad opened, and a flood of unarmed soldiers and civilians poured out, their faces etched with the hope of mercy. But Hulagu's vengeance was merciless. They were herded into groups and executed, their screams mingling with the smoke that now choked the city's air. The ground ran red with blood, and the sun itself seemed to dim in mourning. With no other options left, al-Mustasim finally surrendered. On February 10th, he sent his son and heir, Ahmed, to negotiate the terms of their surrender. They were promised safety, but these promises were as hollow as the caliph's defeated heart. The caliph, along with 3,000 of his closest dignitaries, emerged from the shattered remnants of his city, only to be taken to the southern gate, where Kitbuka's forces awaited. When February 13th dawned, the Mongol forces, led by the formidable Hulagu, stormed into Baghdad. Their first and only mercy was extended to the Nestorian Christians, who were instructed to lock themselves safely within their houses, protected by Hulagu's promise with his wife, Doks Khatun, herself a Christian. The rest of the city was subject to pillaging and killing for a full week, with not even the city's nobles escaping the carnage. According to Kyriakos Ganzaketsi, a 13th century Armenian historian, the Christians in Hulagu's army took special pleasure in Baghdad's sack. It is unknown how many inhabitants were killed. Later Muslim writers estimated between 800,000 and 2 million deaths, including civilian men, women, and children, as well as members of the army who had vainly guarded the city perimeter. While Hulagu himself, in a letter to Louis IX of France, noted that his army had killed 200,000. The horror was compounded by a devastating epidemic among the survivors, potentially a precursor to the Black Death. The true scale of the tragedy remains a haunting testament to the immense human cost of this catastrophic event. After the fall of Baghdad, rumors swirled about the role of al-Alqami, the caliph's advisor, and whether he had betrayed his city to the Mongols. Such an act of treachery would normally have led to a grim fate. But Hulagu, the Mongol leader, had a different plan. Recognizing al-Alqami's efforts to try and guide the caliph away from disaster, Hulagu chose not to execute him. He was reappointed to the vizierate, although he died less than 3 months later. In a move to stabilize and control the conquered city, Hulagu appointed Ali Ba'atar, a Khwarezmian official, to oversee the region and stationed 3,000 soldiers in Baghdad. He issued orders to rebuild the city and reopen its markets, aiming to restore some semblance of normalcy. By March 8th, Hulagu departed for the north, heading towards Hamadan and then Azerbaijan, where he would remain for the next year. On the caliph, there are a few ideas on his destiny. In one tale, Hulagu told the caliph to eat of thy treasure as much as thou wilt, since thou art so fond of it. If the travels of Marco Polo are to be believed, al-Mustasim was reportedly imprisoned in a room filled with his own gold and treasures, eventually dying of starvation in 4 days. In reality, al-Mustasim and his entire family were executed on February 20. When Hulagu stopped the killing and looting and moved his camp outside of the city to avoid the growing foul air, the caliph was covered in a rolled-up carpet and killed by horses to prevent the spilling of a royal's blood, which was highly frowned upon by the Mongols. After much deliberation, Hulagu chose to execute al-Mustasim in order to dispel the illusion that the caliphate was an untouchable, unassailable, and all-powerful institution. Regardless of the reason, the final king of the Islamic Golden Age and its capital passed away in the place he considered home. What remained of Baghdad was set on fire and burned until it was almost completely destroyed. There are rumors that the massacre caused the Tigris River to run red with blood. Until the invaders started tossing hundreds of thousands of books and manuscripts into the river, that is. Witnesses claimed that the Tigris now turned black due to the ink from the precious manuscripts that would no longer be read. From this point on, the House of Wisdom and all of its priceless belongings were extinct. The Abbasids suffered more than just a setback during the 1258 siege and eventual destruction of Baghdad. For the Muslim world, it was more than just a setback. Actually, it was a terrible disaster that affected the entire planet. A golden period had ended, a time of wealth, science, the arts, and much more. No one will ever read the hundreds of thousands of texts that exist. Centuries of potential learning and advancement were never realized, at least not to the fullest extent. For people all throughout the world who had traveled for days on end to study at the House of Wisdom, the fall of Baghdad meant the end of the world as they knew it. And another one, regrettably, far too many of us have now forgotten. See you in the next battle video. Leave in the comment the battle that you want us to go in depth. Please hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.